All right. Hey, guys. This is Michael Tuig with Reclaiming Our Patrimony, and I'm joined with my co-host, Jude Burkett. Jude, how are we doing?
Hey, Michael. Doing great. Excited to talk to you today.
Yeah. So, and what are we going to be talking about today, Jude? Not the weather, hopefully?
Yeah, I hope not. I don't know if anybody would be interested in hearing us talk about the weather, to be quite honest.
I wouldn't be. But anyways, yes, what are we talking about today?
So I believe something about modernity and the Catholic Church, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's what it says in our notes. At least you can read. That's good. So yeah, we're going to be talking about modernity and the church, but specifically modernity and the liturgy. Well, we'll get into it. I was going to say, for any potential non-Catholic listeners we might have out there, if you're confused by this point, don't worry. We'll explain things as we go along. But yes, I first thought that we could start talking about modernity and what modernity even is. Because I think a lot of people throw that term around a lot, especially conservatives and conservative Catholics, saying things like, oh, there's so many problems with modernity, the modern world is so bad, et cetera, but what it seems like everybody has a different idea of what modernity even is. So I first like us to start off talking about what even is modernity and kind of maybe defining our terms a little bit. We thought that modernity can refer to the secular, liberal, democratic global culture that replaced the medieval world as a result of the Protestant Reformation, the Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution, just to name a few things, among many other events, obviously. Like when you're studying history, all sorts of events, people happen. The causation in history is a very interesting thing because there's so many things that build up and lead to other things happening. So boiling down modernity to those four causes is generalizing a lot, but we can't talk about everything here. So,
well, with the definition, you kind of have to get specific, right? So,
right.
I mean, yeah, you need to start somewhere. So I think it's fair to go with these four events at least.
But yeah, so modernity then, as we've defined it, and you could disagree with that definition, I guess, but I think it's a pretty broad definition. And if we want to drill down a little bit more into modernity as it pertains to culture and what people believe in, the sorts of, beliefs, attitudes, cultural assumptions that everybody living, at least in the Western civilized world, have. We thought that you could kind of boil it down to three foundational beliefs. These kind of stem from the Enlightenment, or the Endarkenment, as I've read some people call it. But yes, these three founding beliefs of the Enlightenment include the primacy of reason, like human reason, in opposition to faith, tradition, and authority. Absolute freedom, so absolute freedom in the political sense, in the economic sense, in the social sense. So, in other words, and this bleeds into the third founding belief, which is the primacy of the individual. So the individual person as this completely autonomous being, separate from all other external sources of control or influence. So the individual separated from his family, from the nation, from your local community, things like that.
Actually, kind of wanted to go back to the first sort of founding belief, the Enlightenment. So it says, as we said, you said the primacy of reason in opposition to faith, tradition, and authority. It kind of seems to me that it's almost primacy of reason that and it rejecting faith, tradition, and authority. I don't know what you thought, what your take on that would be. Reason at the expense of faith, tradition, and authority, maybe be a good way of putting it.
Right. Yeah. Well. Yeah. That can be a tangent. Why not? Let's go on a tangent. Yeah. I guess I'm not a philosopher, but
I mean, nor am I. So.
Yeah. But I think we both read enough philosophy, or we will. That to know that in the Enlightenment, obviously there was this hyper focus on human reason, specifically the Enlightenment philosophers started to put a lot more, I guess you could call it stock or faith into human reason and its ability to help us come to know the world. So if you think of modern science, modern science was kind of born, I don't know, you could debate this, Galileo maybe, Newton. I mean, you take physics, Jude, right? So you probably know a little bit more about those figures than I would. But kind of regardless of that, in around the 16th, 17th century, scientists and philosophers started to focus and believe that human reason was capable of coming to know the world in a certain way, or with certainty, I guess is a better way of putting it. And to kind of generalize a lot without going into it very much, when you start to believe that, and you put that up with, or you compare that with religious faith, which essentially, if for at least in terms of Christianity, there's things that we have to believe that don't necessarily, or not don't, but they have reasons that we can't understand for why they work. So like a belief in the Trinity, there's no way that we can reason to that. So when you have this kind of hyper focus on human reason and only trusting human reason, then what does that logically lead to when you're in a context of a religion that makes demands of you to make these a sense of faith in things that you can't reason to, I guess is one way of putting it.
Yeah. Actually, it was kind of interesting. It's almost, you said something about how, the Enlightenment thinkers almost said, you said put their faith in reason. So it's kind of like you can't really get rid of, it's faith in a different, maybe faith disguised almost. It's like I think whether or not whether we like it or not, we operate with faith, just in day-to-day interactions, day-to-day life. But I think, the Enlightenment thinkers would be opposed to faith in the religious context, I guess. Faith per se, you can't really get around it, I guess.
Well, yeah, I guess to cut to the chase, like, can you prove through reason the existence of the triune God?
No.
No, like you just can't. So in the 18th century, like let's say you're a churchman, and then some philosopher approaches you and says, "Oh, your religion is just superstition. Prove to me that your triune God exists." Yeah. What's the churchman going to say? Well, read the Bible. Okay. What if you don't believe in the Bible? Trust in the authority of the church. So now we just have to take it on authority. I can prove to you through mathematical, calculations, the orbit of the sun and the moon and the stars, but you can't prove to me the existence of the triune God, at least through empirical kind of data. So over time, like, more and more people started to kind of buy into that line of thinking, I guess, put their faith, as you said, into that line of thinking. Because I think it is kind of in a sense of faith when you say that human reason is able to come to know things with certainty.
Right. Yeah, I guess it's sort of that kind of raises the question, why, like, they're obviously putting their faith in something. Why reason rather than religion? That's like, I don't know the answer to that, but
right. And I mean, I think part of it too is when you read into it, a lot of Enlightenment philosophers were also, I mean, they held their philosophical beliefs almost religiously, and a lot of them genuinely believed that if every human being just acted reasonably, then we could live in a perfect world, and we could kind of build a utopia on Earth, and human beings on their own would be capable of perfecting themselves as long as everybody lived reasonably. And one thing is, okay, well, how are we defining reasonably?
What do you mean by reasonably?
Well, I mean, that's it would depend on like each individual philosopher, but that's kind of where it breaks down. It's like, okay, what's your definition of reasonable? Okay, how did you come to that definition?
I reasoned.
It's like, ooh. But then too, like, going back to this primacy, this placing a primacy on reason opposed to faith. Well, it ultimately just becomes faith. When you say, if everybody just lives reasonably, you're disregarding like how we're defining reasonably, then you're also claiming that there's no original sin, ultimately. Because that's assuming that, every human being is capable of living reasonably, and B, that they're capable of doing that for a long enough period of time to build a utopia on Earth. It's kind of like communism. Like,
yeah.
The old joke, like, has real communism ever been tried anywhere before? Yeah, and it's failed every single time. Because theoretically, like, if everybody perfectly adhered to Karl Marx's system that he set up, theoretically,
well, it's like one of the
utopia.
one of the founding fathers. I can't remember who said it, but I think the quote is, "If men were angels, there would be no need for government." Essentially, so it's like,
yeah,
I think that might be James Madison. I could be mistaken, but that's sort of the idea we're getting at here.
That's actually that's really interesting. You brought it up because I've actually this is we're gonna stop the tangent here, but maybe for a future episode. Because I've recently been thinking about Enlightenment philosophers and how and in conjunction with a class I took in my reading into like angelology and demonology and how exactly angels and demons operate, what they are, things like that. It seems to me that Enlightenment philosophers were philosophizing for angels, or devising their philosophies as if human beings were the same as angels.
Because angels, now correct me if I'm wrong, they're pure intellect, right?
Yeah. They're pure. They're literally pure intellect, pure will. So,
and if you believe that, because as we said, that the primacy of reason, obviously, to reason you need intellect.
Oh yeah,
that makes
right.
Interesting.
But things like again, tangent. We won't go there, but things like Enlightenment epistemology is very. It's almost like reading theology on angels, because they almost treat human beings like a brain in a vat, which is, if you want a really weird way of thinking about angels are kind of like floating brains, but without the brain part.
Immaterial brain.
Yeah, well, I mean, how do you even conceive of just like a will and an intellect existing something? Anyways,
that's off the path.
That was way off the reservation. But yes, okay, back to what were we even talking about? Oh yes, modernity.
Yeah,
this is probably how the podcast is going to go. If we're being honest.
Just gonna embrace it.
Yep. But what does it mean to say that we're modern people? I guess. Oh yeah, I remember where I was going to go. But talking about modernity in the abstract, what does that look like in the concrete?
Yeah. How does it manifest?
And I'm thinking things like, obviously advanced technology.
Right.
That's pretty obvious. Like computers, they didn't have computers in the Middle Ages. But also things like gender ideology.
Yeah. Things like transgenderism, because transgenderism basically is the idea that the individual kind of gets to conform reality to how they view themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of, that goes to that third principle of the individuals are completely autonomous and separate from external things. So transgenderism, somebody believes they can transition to the opposite gender, whatever.
Right. Reality, and then,
that doesn't work.
What, you're telling me that you're telling me a man can't become a woman? Whoa. Whoa, dude. Whoa.
Hot take.
Hot take. I don't know if I'm going to agree with that.
Oh, we're first dispute. I see.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. No, but you're right. And, kind of the idea that reality is essentially becomes anything that you want it to be, and then people have to conform to that.
Yeah. It's almost contradictory because they would hold that each person essentially gets to interpret their own reality. But then how does that work when you come together, right? It's like if you have your own reality and I have my own reality, there's no way we can, like, there's no common reality.
Oh, there's a lot packed in there. Well, I mean, for one thing, why do you think we have so many problems in our country?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if Jude thinks he's a woman, and I tell him he isn't, but he firmly believes that he is, then if we can't, like, there's no way that we're going to come to a common understanding at that point. So then at that point, it just boils down to who has more power, ultimately.
And I kind of, yeah, you kind of, if you look out in the culture, I think you can kind of see that playing out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you have more political power than I do, then you just force me to conform to that. And yeah, if anybody's shocked by the fact that that's where our that's where our culture's at, well, I have news for you.
You got another thing coming.
Yeah. But yeah, so I guess other examples of like what it means to live in the modern age. So we mentioned advanced technology, so gender ideology, things like transgenderism, homosexuality. I personally like this one, transspeciesism, where
yes,
where you become.
Is this the furry people? Is that another term for it?
Yeah, where you think you're an animal.
Yeah.
I don't know what else. Moving on from that one. But things like divorce, rupture of family and community life, big centralized international governments. So all of these things are hallmarks of the modern world. And I'm sure you can think of other ones. But so things like homosexuality, obviously homosexuality has existed throughout the entire human history of humanity. I mean, like Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yes, go back to biblical times.
Or, the Greeks. But yeah, I guess the bigger what distinguishes modern homosexuality in the modern age is the cultural assumptions that go along with it. To put it really basically, by and large, everyone accepts homosexuality as natural and fine, morally fine, culturally fine. Even most or a lot of Republicans, which is disturbing. But that's radically different than most periods of human history. So I guess that's just one example, but all the other ones that we listed, their existence and the kind of cultural assumptions or attitudes that most people have about them are distinctly modern phenomena.
Yeah.
At the same time, there are also a lot of problems that exist in the modern world. And a lot of these problems are also problems that I don't want to say didn't exist in the rest of human history, but they definitely are, I would argue, are distinctly modern phenomena. So problems that I'm thinking of are things like hopelessness, despair, social isolation, suicide, depression, sky-high divorce rates, massive numbers of abortions, drug abuse and massive increases in drug overdoses, just tons of revolutionary movements, especially radicalized young people. So school shooters, Islamic terrorists, Antifa and BLM supporters, people like that. And then a massive explosion of interest in the occult, New Age, even Satanism. Then also things like relativism and then narcissism. That's a huge one. This hyper focus on the self. And maybe not all of those things, but a lot of those things are, again, maybe they're not like exclusive to the modern age, but the extent of the problem is a distinctly modern phenomenon. So I'm thinking especially like depression.
What seems interesting. So we had like advance in technology seems to be a kind of a distinguished. I mean, but there's throughout history, technology has been advancing,
right?
But I think technology has allowed for like centralized governments. You can't have a huge centralized government without some sort of advanced technology that allows you to sort of be able to interact at a large scale efficiently. Like you just couldn't have that back, I don't know, even 500 years ago. Mm-hmm. International government, same thing. And then also like, I think like social media is another thing. I think that's could be the cause of a lot of these problems, especially like the
what are your thoughts on social media?
I mean, I don't. So, full disclosure, I don't have any social media accounts. I mean, I guess you could consider podcasting social media, but so like things like I'm thinking things like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, or whatever.
No, I don't have social media either.
But yeah, it definitely encourages narcissism, like a focus on the self, curating your image, curating the image that people will see, and like only that image. So it's like a very specific, almost. I guess it would be artificial, really, image of yourself.
Yeah, and actually, so now that you bring that up, it's really interesting how all these things kind of play together. Because staying on the social media thought. I don't know if you've ever watched the documentary. What's it called? The Social Dilemma.
No, I haven't. I haven't heard of it, but
it's actually, I'd check it out.
Okay.
It's about social media, and to spoil it a little bit, it talks about all the negative aspects and consequences of social media. But one of the things that some of the people in that documentary mentioned is exactly your point, that social media is almost inherently, well, not inherently, but it fosters artificiality. So when you're, creating a social media persona for yourself, you have complete freedom to basically try to make yourself appear as perfect as possible. So like taking the perfect picture and adding the perfect filter and, cleaning up any blemishes that might appear on your face in the picture and then sharing it with the world. But what these researchers were finding was that, almost ironically, the increase in social media use among especially younger kids, so like teens and younger teens, so like 10 to 18, that increase in social media use also tracked with a massive increase in depression, in suicidal thoughts, things like that, because when you're on social media and you're seeing all these pictures of perfect people just on your feed, and you're comparing yourself to them as a 12-year-old, as 12-year-olds are wont to do, and you're like, wow, all of these people on my feed are perfect. All these people I follow are just, physically perfect, and they're seem to have the perfect lifestyle, and I don't. Well,
that's going to lead to a lot of problems.
Yeah, a lot of like self-esteem problems and problems with depression, especially because social media is so ubiquitous. Everybody's on it. But I think you also had another thought that I wanted to go off of, which was that, like, the things that distinguish the modern world and then the problems of the modern world it's very interesting how they overlap. So we talked about advanced technology, and you would think that with all of the advances that we have in technology and our ability to produce so much surplus wealth, right? Like on a scale that has never been seen before in human history. The amount of material comfort that we live in today is like the most wealthy Chinese emperor in at the height of the Tang dynasty in the 8th century would be like a poor person in the United States. That's not even an exaggeration. Like that's just the truth. But like disregarding all these like material comforts that we have and all these like technological advances and all of that, and we still have massive problems with depression and a sense of meaninglessness and purposelessness in life, and suicide, drug overdoses, abortion, all these things, which it doesn't seem like those problems should even exist, at least on the surface.
Yeah.
Which I guess this is a nice little segue into the main meat of what we were actually going to talk about, because at least it seems to us, and I think it's pretty, we're not making any kind of new or radical or bold statement in saying this, but that many modern people, if not most modern people, are desperately searching for meaning, belief, transcendence, escape, stability. They're all distinct things, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that people are desperately searching for that, because you don't have a culture where all the problems that we just listed,
like despair, depression, hopelessness, that stuff doesn't, if that doesn't coincide with meaning, belief, stability. Those two things they're inversely related.
Right, exactly. If you have belief in something that transcends this world, well, like, no matter how hard this world is, chances are you're not going to have a lot of these problems
right.
that you would otherwise have if you didn't have that belief.
Yeah, so I don't think it's too hard to argue that is a problem.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of self-evident.
Although we say that, and there are lots of people who would either disagree with that or, probably disagree with the source of the problem, which I think is where we're headed towards next. At least one of the sources of these problems, because there's only so much we can talk about and so many tangents we can go on. But yeah, so having kind of set up all that background of painting the picture, so to speak, this is the modern world that we live in. We thought that we'd talk specifically about modernity and the Catholic Church.